Today's project is we want to take our FZR, it's a 1991, and replace the spark plugs. Now rather than just use the traditional plugs that belong in a bike, I'm going to try to do an upgrade to the IRIDIUM plugs. These are about $11 a piece and supposedly will last a little bit longer. And again, we'll find out if they're appropriate for this bike and the way we ride. Now when I did the RD400, I don't remember, several people told me put IRIDIUM plugs in, you won't ever have a problem. Well, I bought 4 IRIDIUM plugs, put 2 in the bike. The 2 spares are in the toolbox and have never come out, and that's about 8,000 miles now on this bike. With 1 set of plugs, that's pretty good for a 2-stroke. So we're going to try them in the FZR. Now on the bikes that it's super easy to get at the plugs, well, you're more prone to change them regularly. What happened with the FZR when we were doing a lot of track days, I would be prone to changing them a lot more often. What, the last year or so, I've just ridden on the street, and the bike's got a little rough around the edges at high RPM, so this will be a good test for me. So to start any job in my shop, because room is limited, first thing is to become a parking lot attendant and move the bikes around so I can get to work right under the place where the lighting is the best. Now most of the modern sport bikes are pretty similar. You've got to take a lot of body work off. In this case, the tank, the seat, everything has to come apart. The air filter under the tank is in the way. And we got to take some of the brackets that hold the coils and the wires in place here. So time to have some coffee and start pulling a bike apart. Now a couple of little tips, things that'll make your life a little bit easier. In this case we have a quick disconnect fuel line. So when we were doing the track days it was very, very handy, of course. And I always left enough clearance that I could just put a rubber hammer under the back of the tank and get that quick disconnect fuel line off. And that quick disconnect fuel line is worth its weight in gold. You're not spilling gas all over the place every time you take the tank off. One thing will always make the job a lot easier, if you know you're going to work on a bike, is arrange it so that you have a very little or no fuel in the tank. To show you how intelligent I am, the tank is totally full. I just filled it up at the end of the last ride. So it for sure is going to be heavy. I don't want to spill any fuel. All right. Now while we have it apart, we may as well clean the filter. And I always look around for anything else that looks loose, or, oh, look at this, a free leaf. Now, we did a lot of upgrades on this bike. We have a new fuel pump, a new lithium-ion battery, and a brand new chain, a brand new sprockets. So one of the things that because we're anticipating this fall, getting all new Airtex bodywork and making a Kenny Roberts paint job to match our RD. Now this is one of the things that I did in the days we were going to the racetrack. I made this as easy to work on as possible, so taking all these air screw filter carburetor parts, I just need 1 Allen wrench. I replaced all of the Phillips screws, and this is such a good idea. Boy, this is one of those things that just pays for itself. And a lot of times the reason people don't do maintenance like replacing plugs on a regular basis is they don't want it to go through all this stuff taking a. Now last but not least, to get at the plugs, these 3 screws have to come out, and we have to, this is really a tricky part of it, is you got to get all of this wires and harnesses off to one side, replace these plugs, and get them all over to the other side to get the other 2. So, and this is why a lot of people try, maybe myself included, they skip doing the maintenance. That is one thing I always do. It's just a habit I have. As I take parts apart, I start at this end. These are the parts, the tools I need. I try to put a clean rag or something down. So now when I go to put the bike back together, I work from this end over and I know I have all the correct tools out. Now what I do, and it's really a pain to do, is you got to get these up out of the way, and one by one you can get in, and you need a special plug wrench to get in there, and it's really a little bit tricky to get in. That plug, I believe, if I remember it, is the one that's the most difficult. The rest are relatively easy, but you got to be able to move the coil mount around. Now I've heard some people take the throttle cables off or disconnect all this or whatever, but I've been able to do it just by maneuvering this around. This is the special wrench you need. It's got a universal joint. What I do, just to make it easier to work on, I put a little safety wire around that universal joint. Otherwise it starts walking in and out. And then you can work this end with a ratchet. This is the worst one to get at down here, because you're off to the side. Now the other three seem a little bit better. Okay. And the Iridium plugs have a little bit finer electrode down the center than a standard plug. But we gap them exactly the same. I always try to do this one on this side first because this is the hardest one to do. And to get a thread caught, you really got to struggle to get this one in the way you're comfortable. See, number 2, a lot easier to get to. That's why I always do that one first. That one is really annoying. This one, the rest of the 3 are relatively straightforward. You have a lot more clearance on this side. I'm not sure why. That's 2. Now with the 2 plugs done on that side, we've got to move all this coil assembly and everything carefully over into that side. And then we get down at the last 2 plugs. Little tip you can do, because of the nature of this, to get in at these plugs, and of course this side is definitely easier. You could reach your hand in there now. The zip tie holds this up out of the way. Otherwise you have to disconnect a lot of wires and the throttle cable and just a lot more work. This is the quick and dirty way to do it. And just tough it out, get those last 2 plugs out. The 4th one, hooray! Now there's one thing I always try to do anytime I have something apart, is see, number 1, clean up, and of course this is my cleaning stick with our microfiber with a little bit of kerosene or diesel fuel or whatever. Get in all of these nooks and crannies, and what it'll do, it'll just make the next time I have to work on a bike a little bit easier. It takes me 5 minutes now. It doesn't matter. The time is not of the essence right now. I like to it's just personal. I like to keep the stuff as clean as possible. Now with all the new plugs in, it'll be interesting to see, and maybe there won't be any difference at all. I don't think there'll be a performance. The plugs are supposed to last longer. And they do on the RD for sure. If you have a 2-stroke, well worth the Iridium plugs. But again, I don't know. I never had them in any of the 4-stroke bikes, and I know when I changed the plugs on the R1, and that video's out there a long time already. Special plugs. So no substitute, 1 plug. Anyway, from this point on, it's really just putting it all back together. Now, I always save the old plugs and I numbered them with a marker pen and put them in a piece of cardboard. The reason is I like to keep track of, and of course I was doing it when we were going to track days. Not really that important for street riding. I'm more important now to log in the mileage and see how long the Iridium plugs are going to last, and I'll report that after one of them goes bad, or hopefully maybe none of them will go bad. Now again, while I have it apart, there's a couple other little things beside the cleanup. And this bike, I can check, and since the day I've owned the bike, I've never had to add any fluid to the cooling system, so that's good. And all my wiring, and this bike has a lot of extra wiring because of the way it's been modified. And I have my connection for the radar detector up there. I'm going to route that wire a little neater. So while I have it apart, there's always some little maintenance to do. And then when I'm done, it's just a question of, this will be a relatively straightforward thing to put it back together. Okay, the air filter is all cleaned and serviced and ready. Now, that's where having Allen screws instead of those silly Phillips things that stretch out, strip out. This is where it's always a pain in the neck when you have a full tank. Getting your fingers in these little tight spots. And with the rubber hammer holding up the back of the tank, it just makes the fuel line on the other side and hooking this up just a little bit easier. There's our quick disconnect fuel line. Again, that rubber hammer really makes it just a little bit easier. Now with the job done, Luciano had a great saying I'll never forget. When we used to do track days, he'd always put a new set of plugs in a bike and say, a new set of plugs is like having a fresh set of underwear on. Well, I don't know because I don't change my underwear that often, but we do change the plugs. So now that we're done, all that's left is to get some nice weather for a test ride. And thanks to everyone who watches our channel. We try to share all the information, all the adventures we have, all of the things that go along with being a motorcycle enthusiast. And if you love these old bikes like I do, you know, every day you own one, it can be an adventure. This was a relatively straightforward job, but I hope you picked up some good tips you can use no matter what bike you're riding. And as I always say at the end of the video, thanks for watching. We got some cool stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. And we're really looking forward to the fall project of turning this bike into a Kenny Roberts replica. And now if it would just stop raining. Anyway, again, thanks for watching.